Today is day 2 of this form of lecturing. I hope that yesterday you got a lot of experience with bacteria, protists, and prokaryotes. Today we're going to talk about fungi and some introductions to plants. So let's get started. Make sure you have your notes ready to take the notes filling in the blanks that you have. First of all, what are fungi? They are not plants, even though many times we categorize them with other plants. Why are they not plants? Instead of carrying out photosynthesis to get their nutrients, they actually take nutrients from other living things. They use digestive enzymes to absorb that nutrient. They use enzymes and other dissolving materials to get all of the things that they need. They are also made of a special material called chitin. It's a modified sugar, a very strong type of sugar that we actually also find outside of insect skeletons. So it's very durable, and that is what they're made of, which is a little bit different from plants. Now, yeast are a very common type of fungus. We've already talked about them and how they help our bread to rise. They actually give off carbon dioxide and some alcohol, and that is what we use for our alcoholic beverages and our breads. They are a fungus, and they usually live most of their life as a single cell. But we also have fungi like mushrooms, that they're multicellular, rather large organisms. And how do these cells combine? They're actually branched together in filaments called hyphae. And there's a picture there of a mushroom and how all of those little individual segments make up the entire mushroom. In most of the fungi, the walls that divide the hyphae resemble cells because they have one or two nuclei in that compartment, and they're open through the cytoplasm and let the organelles go wherever they need to throughout that structure, that hyphae. In a mushroom, the body of the mushroom is actually called the fruiting body, and it has the reproductive structures of that fungus. That fruiting body grows from the mycelium, or the mass of branching hyphae below the soil. So instead of having roots that take up the nutrients, they have something very similar but called mycelium. And the clusters of mushrooms, sometimes you see mushrooms close together, they can actually kind of share or have a part of the same mycelium, and actually they're part of the same organism. It's like one organism spread out between many different parts, many different smaller mushrooms. Some fungi actually reproduce asexually, and that is in the form of spores. They make a copy of all their cells, and that cell goes off and makes a new organism, a new mushroom, or a new fungus. And that again is asexual, it's identical to the parent. And these spores are often adapted to travel through water, air, and other mediums. You could also break off or bud an identical copy from the hyphae, and that again is also asexual reproduction because you have an identical organism being reproduced. But some organisms do reproduce, some of the fungus do reproduce sexually. And the moldy bread that you see can actually go through sexual reproduction, where the male and the female gametes actually combine, and they recombine their information and get more genetic diversity. There are about 100,000 different types of fungus that we know, as biologists have studied. And they're put into several different groups based on their structure, the way they look, and their reproductive structures. First of all, we have the club fungi. I'm not going to require you to know all of the scientific names, but we have the Basidium mycota, which is the club fungi, which the mushrooms that you normally think of that we eat are in that category. Also, the sac fungi, Ascomycota, are made up of morels, truffles, and the yeasts. It's because they look like little sacs. and that's where we get the sac fungi from. And then we have the common molds. Whenever you have a mold, that's also in this zygomycota category. And hopefully you'll get to look at some molds in the lab, and that is from this category, the type of fungus. Many fungi decompose again, like we've already said. They release digestive enzymes that break down different fruits, leaves, other organic material, and they absorb that nutrients into their fruiting bodies. And many organisms remove important trace elements from the nutrients in soil, and the fungi actually replace these nutrients. As they take some up, they leave some behind, and so they're very important to our ecosystems. However, for some fungi, they are parasites, and they can harm humans, other animals, and plants. There are some plant diseases. There's a corn disease that's caused by a fungus and causes the corn to just be destroyed when it's attacked by this fungus. There's also some mildews that can affect different plants. And if you've ever heard of athlete's foot, that is a type of fungus that harms or attaches to humans, and we are affected by it. Lastly, there's something very similar to a fungus called a lichen. A lichen is actually a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and a photosynthetic organism. So they work together, benefiting from each other. The photosynthetic organism is green and provides the nutrients from the sun, and the fungus also kind of gives it protection and allows it them both to survive. Lastly, there's another type of relationship between the fungus and the roots of some plants. We call this relationship mycorrhiza. And it's a fungus that attaches itself to the roots of plants and actually helps to absorb more nutrients and more water than the roots would be able to absorb on their own. And researchers have estimated that about 80 or 90% of the roots or plants have a mycorrhiza fungus. And again, they help to collect water and minerals and bring them to the roots, and it allows the plant to actually have more nutrient capability, getting more from the soil than it could alone. In one example, an orchid, it is essential for this orchid to have this particular fungus attached to it. Without it, the seeds will not germinate without this fungus. So there are different relationships that are actually helpful with the fungus. That is all we're going to talk about with fungi. You're going to be looking at some mushrooms and maybe some molds and kind of checking out their characteristics and seeing how they compare to plants, and remembering that they're not plants, they are in their own category because they do not carry out photosynthesis. This next section, also tomorrow, you're going to be dissecting lilies or a particular flower and looking at the different reproductive structures of that plant. So we're going to move on to chapter 24, section 1, the flowering parts of plants. So what are some structures that you need to know in order to be ready for this lab? Remember, flowers are the reproductive organs, and they have about 4 different specialized leaves that help with this. We have sepals, petals, stamens, and carpels. And you have a diagram in your book and on the PowerPoint. It's going to show you those different characteristics of the flower. So we're going to start with the sepals and the petals. The outermost circle of the floral parts contains the sepals. They're actually not colored in this particular picture. They're the green parts that are right below all of those petals. They actually are the ones that enclose the whole flower before it's opened up and the petals are revealed. So they're protection before the flower has bloomed. And then we have the petals on the outside, those brightly colored petals. And the number, color, and shape of these petals actually attract pollinators and other insects to them. Next, we have the stamens. and they are the male parts of the flower. Each of the stamen has a stalk and a filament at the top. These structure right here, the stalk and filament, is called an anther, and they're the structure in which the pollen actually comes from. The pollen is produced in the anthers. Lastly, we have the carpels. This is going to be the female part of the plant. It's mostly the innermost part of the plant, nice and protected, so that it can protect the seeds that it's going to produce. It's got a broad base that's forming the ovary of the plant. And towards the top we have the stigma and the style. These again are the female parts that are going to receive the pollen and allow it to go down to the ovary. The whole part of this, the female part, is called the pistil, another name for it, for the ovary, style, and stigma. They call that the pistil. All of those fused together. And you know, flowers have many different shapes and colors and sizes, so there's a great diversity in this particular kingdom. So for tomorrow, you're going to need to know these structures. Make sure you can kind of find your way around this picture, identify them, and you're going to identify them in a real plant in class tomorrow. Come to class with questions and with curiosity, ready to learn about fungus and plants. I hope you have a great day.